You don't have to be in a leadership position to influence others.
Am I shining light on myself or am I shining light on other people?
The open door policy isn't working.
How are we moving humanity forward in a positive, loving, accelerated, evolutionary way?
Everybody's watching you as a leader.
Staff doesn't care that you know the company core values. Staff cares that my leaders know my core values.
Self-realization is so important in that pursuit of self-excellence.
Leadership is about influence. That's it. Today on the EOR podcast, I'm joined by three leaders who are reshaping how we think about business, mental health, and human performance. Dr. Jivi Saran, founder of QuantumBusiness, blends neuroscience, energy systems, and strategy to help entrepreneurs scale without sacrificing their well-being. Jim Brayshaw, a leading authority on mental health and psychological safety, Jim has spent decades teaching organizations how trust, empathy, and emotional intelligence drive real performance. And Chris Marr, founder of the QuestionFirstGroup and creator of The Authoritative Coach. Chris helps leaders transform how they communicate by asking better questions that unlock clarity, confidence, and connection. Three different domains, one powerful conversation. Let's go. Hey everybody, it's Quinn Magnuson of the EOR, Effort Over Results podcast. Today's episode is something special. This is a leadership power panel. Leadership is evolving faster than ever, and the old models of authority, command, and control are no longer enough. Leaders today are expected to communicate clearly, create trust, support mental and emotional well-being, and operate with heart and intention. To unpack these ideas and push the conversation forward, I've brought together Jim, Jivi, and Chris, three remarkable voices in this space, and together we're going to explore what leadership truly looks like in 2025 and beyond, how we can coach leaders better so they can build teams, organizations, and relationships that actually work. Let's get into it. Welcome, everybody. I want to start here. What is one leadership myth that each of you would eliminate forever? Let's start with you, Jivi.
That self-excellence is not needed in a business. So
Okay.
I think that would be a myth, that you're not continually working and that you're just building a vision and you're moving teams through the process rather than being committed to your own self-excellence.
Say a little bit more about that. What does self-excellence mean to you?
Self-excellence means that I'm professionally, personally growing, but more so the personal growth of my self-awareness, self-realization, moving towards self-actualization. So it's more about self. Do I understand myself enough? Do I develop and grow myself enough? For example, I just came out of a silent retreat for 7 days. So when I'm there, I'm introspective. I'm reflecting on things. And so that time spent in silence has made me think about what does the year look like going forward, not external answers, more so internal answers.
Jim, what about you? What's a myth you would eliminate forever for leaders?
I think I'm ready to eliminate the open door policy, Quinn, in organizations. It starts with actually understanding that there's always a us and them, and that open door policy, it prevents truth seeking by leaders and relies on me as the employee or staff member to embolden myself in some way and go against thousands of years of ingrained concept that no, you're the boss, you hold my paycheck, I'm the employee or staff member. I have to submit in some way. And that's inherent in our genetics when you look at leadership versus those who report to leadership. So it would be a version of the leader pursuing truth in the unique way of building relationships and exploring core values with members as they move. We can talk more later, but the open door policy isn't working.
Excellent. Chris, what about you?
That's
Leadership
interesting.
myth.
I think there's something about this idea that, like, when you get promoted to a leadership role, that a lot of people think that they're being rewarded for the work that they've done. And I think that's a problem. In other words, it's like, oh, I have reached the place that I'm supposed to get to, and I'm going to reap all the benefits of it now as a reward. And so I think we need to reframe this idea that it's not a reward. You're being given like perhaps the biggest responsibility that you've ever been given. And it's like, actually, it's about maybe even starting again from the beginning, right? It's like recognizing that actually this is something new that I'm being given here. And so I think this is a myth, and I think a lot of people do feel like this when they're given a leadership position, as it's some type of reward instead of a responsibility and a commitment to others.
Does everyone think that what leadership should look like today? Because we said it in the pre-show that leadership in 2025 and beyond, it has to look different. But do you feel like what each of us agree on what leadership looks like today is something that did exist in the 20th century? Because when we think back to, you know, the middle of the century, it was command control. It was do as I say, you're getting a paycheck. You know, were there leaders like that back then, or were they just hidden? Jivi, what do you think about that in terms of what leadership looked like, let's say 50 years ago, compared to what we know has to work today?
Well, I think a really good example right now is just between the three of us. Like each of us spoke about an old paradigm of leadership and where the leadership needs to go. Like each of us actually just in the intro here gave an example of what leadership was and what leadership needs to be going forward. So I think in the 50s and 60s, we did have people, you know, Martin Luther King is a really great example. How could he gather millions, thousands of people with no cell phones, no ability to be able to gather people? And that is a sign of a spectacular leader, right? Is how do you gather people in the time in which you don't have social media and you don't have those things, yeah? So there was a mission, a purpose, a light, a spark that was governing that leadership. And I think, yeah, there were many leaders of the sort at the time that were quiet leaders. They were just doing their gig. It wasn't about rah, rah, look at me, here I am. It was about that quiet movement that just allowed people to move because they were so passionate about what they were bringing to the world.
Jim, what would you say to what Jivi just said?
Yeah, I really enjoy hearing that shared passion was part of what they were bringing to the world. And that paradox of progress is we move forward, but now that shared passion or shared vision, which is what unites us and makes us move away from the obligatory, I have to answer to leadership, to the desire, I want to be part of what leadership's vision is. And when we hear this shared passion as a kind of formula, now passions are so diverse. Like we're in a unique era of leadership, and leadership has it harder than ever because if the four of us are in a new company and there's one leader, we all have different visions because we've been exposed to so many options for visions, and it complicates that buy-in for any leader because I will always see things in a way that you don't. None of us do.
Chris, do you think
Yeah.
that yeah, go ahead. If you
I was just
wanna...
thinking that I was just sort of summarizing these ideas in my head because I have this idea that who's this all for, right? In other words, where am I shining the light? Am I shining the light on myself or am I shining the light on other people? And I think a lot of leaders aren't going to get the pat on the back, the books written about them, because that's the job. The job isn't really about you. In other words, I think if you can say, oh, it's not about me. I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I don't have to be the one that's being celebrated here, because that's not actually the job. The job is to, set other people up to succeed, and when I think about a leader, I think about, your leadership tree. How many leaders came through you, right? Or came from the work that you did? And I think that's a great sort of metric for success over the decades that we're in, that we work with people. And so I think about just summarizing really what's just been said already, really. But I think a lot of, when you really think about it, a lot of leadership stuff, whether it was like front of mind 50 years ago, like who was like, we're shining a light on people like Winston Churchill, for example, or whoever these leaders are. We're getting a narrative about leadership. But when you get people like this together and you think about it, it's all first principles, like the stuff that just works. It's timeless, it's just timeless and true. And some people will use these first principles and some people won't, and I think the ones that do use the first principles aren't necessarily the ones that we're going to ever hear about. It's like Eleanor Roosevelt or, just just committed to the vision of helping others and doing the work, you know?
Yeah, indeed. I think it even
Yeah.
goes farther than that, right? Like when you think about Aristotle and Socrates and all of the work that they brought, all of it is applicable to leadership. But you know what I often think about is why are we so stupid that we don't apply them? Applicability is where the issue is. The issue isn't that we've been given stuff, that we know stuff. I think the issue is applicability. So Aristotle from Socrates learned the concept of eudaimonia, right, which was a part of a doctorate. So eudaimonia is the commitment to self-excellence. It's excellence, right, the pursuit of self-excellence. But here we are with leaders that have not done that. Leaders that hold financial strings, right? They sit in these forums in which they make decisions for the world. But as Chris was saying about shining the light, I was thinking, are there leaders that simply shine the light on solely profit? I'm not saying don't shine the light on profit. I'm saying if you shine the light solely on profit, then where does your leadership sit? So when you look at leaders today, I often think about this, the old ancient wisdom that existed. We don't generally, major amounts of leaders don't apply it even today. So what about new wisdom, let alone ancient wisdom? Where does applicability go? Does that make
Well,
sense?
the barriers I see, though, to applying the ancient wisdom are that we're in a collective that consumes our energy in a massive amount of different ways, and so the genetic stream that should pass through ancient wisdom to me today is now disrupted, and I'm forced to pivot because this is a performative environment we're in of competition. Whereas the ancient wisdom, when you talk about first principles, Chris, it's a brilliant way to say that, because the first principles of the ancient wisdom was that I was below the leader and I had no true input to the leader's role. I only did what they did. But that was a first principle at one point. Now the first principle is be your authentic self, Jim. Let your voice be heard, Jim. Like, it's a different set of principles.
I wonder if a lot of leaders or people who are put in that position are leading out of fear. Not, they won't admit it. Many leaders would never admit that, but fear of failure, and that's where the old school leadership of command control, and where still a lot of Boomer generation and Gen X generation leaders are leading from, is really a place of fear of failure, fear of not hitting targets, maybe potentially fear of losing their job. I guess if you're the business owner, that's not the case, but now this shift to a more compassionate, empathetic approach to leadership, a lot of leaders see that as a massive drop off, and that it's weak. The four people in this room obviously know that it's not that, but how do we explain that to the stubborn, bullheaded Gen X or Boomer leader that is really leading more out of fear of failure and that command control leadership? How do we get them to see that the new way of leadership, compassion, empathy, psychological safety in the workplace, actually in the long run it's sustainable and it works, and it actually does lead to profitability? Jivi.
Well, I can give an example of that. I was working with a construction company, and I had an owner that was very aggressive in his behavior. The issue was he had gone onto a site and thrown a hard hat at somebody, and the person had like a couple of stitches in their forehead. But he was telling me I gave the hard hat to him underhanded. I said, well, if you gave it underhanded, he wouldn't have stitches in his forehead. Like, that's not even possible. And so what happened, though, was that we started to dissect that behavior with him. And he was willing. The beautiful portion was that he was willing to dissect, because everything, Quinn, you're saying requires self-awareness that you're running from fear. Hence why the self-awareness, self-realization is so important in that pursuit of self-excellence. So when we started to dissect why he did how he behaves and why he behaves that way, I'm not going through the process, but at the end, he says, my father said to me, who was also a carpenter, that if you behave in this way, which is nice, kind, compassionate, empathetic, you will be seen as weak. People will run all over you and all that kind of stuff. He had those unconscious biases in his head that if I behave this way within construction, this is what's going to happen because my father taught me this. So I said, what if I said to you, silence can do the same thing? As a matter of fact, it can have a higher impact than what you're doing right now. Would you be willing to practice with 3 people? Just 3 people. He said, yeah, I'd be willing to do that. We showed him that silence is so mystical to the other person that they're actually going, oh, we don't know what just happened here because he didn't say anything. So literally completely shifted the way he shows up in business as a leader. And today, this is now 9 years later, he's still in the same position where he uses silence as to do the heavy lifting rather than throwing hard hats at people.
Awesome.
Chris, I want to go back to Chris. I want to throw to you here because I know that you and I spoke on our episode together about people pleasers, and I think there are some leaders who would suggest that, you know, being compassionate and empathetic turns me into a people pleaser, and I have to hold their hands and walk them through everything. And once again, it's a sign of weakness. So how do people still hold authority, but still show compassion and empathy?
It depends. Yeah. So what it depends on is what are you working on. I think what's the focus. So, you know, I think when we say authority, what we're not talking about is power over other people. What we're talking about is like a perception of respect. So respecting someone. When you look at somebody that's a people pleaser, they tend, in leadership, they'll tend to change their behavior based on who they're working with or who's watching them. And so that leads to like diminishes trust because we don't know who this person is really actually. And they change their behavior so often, we actually know what to expect. And so whether they like you or not, what's more important is whether they respect you or not. In other words, do I know who this person is? Do they carry themselves quite consistently through their leadership role in all the different circumstances? I don't have to guess who I have to be around this person as well. Like a good example of this is probably, or a good comedy version of this is like David Brent from The Office, for example. You know, nobody likes him and nobody respects him because he's too busy trying to be liked by everybody else. And so he actually, by trying to be liked, he actually diminishes everything about his trust and the respect and also any form of authority that he might have. Nobody does anything that he wants and nobody respects him, right? I know it's an extreme example, but it's probably happening quite a lot. And so, you know, there's an example like that. We have to think, well, what's the alternative? And I think my sense is that it really depends on what the focus is. So let me give you an example. You know, I was working with a leader a couple of years ago, and we were just having a casual conversation about it. And she was struggling with one of her team members, like just having lots and lots of problems. And I asked her a question. I said, who in your team do you have the strongest relationship with? And she named somebody. And I said, I bet you've been through a lot together. She's like, oh, you know, started like telling me all these stories. And I was like, see the person you're having problems with, how many difficult conversations have you had with that person? Not one. And so what was interesting to me was the correlation between, I'm using this word lightly, not scientifically, between the number of difficult conversations you're willing to have and the strength of the relationship that you have with people around you. And so when I say focus, I mean, as a leader, are you doing the stuff that nobody else will do? Because that's what the leadership role is. It's like the most painful stuff, which is dealing with the gossip and the back channeling and the politicking and the difficult conversations that you need to have, you know, instead of avoiding those things. And so when you think empathy, compassion, it's like it can still be hard. Like love can be hard still, right? It doesn't have to be all soft. In other words, we need to have a difficult conversation. I care about you. I want you to succeed, but I can see that there's something that you're doing here that's actually holding everybody back from being successful or holding you back from being successful. And therefore, if you let your empathy get in the way of that, it can turn into silence. But we want our feelings for that person to drive us towards having the conversation. So long story short, it's like, where are we focusing that empathy and that compassion? Is it driving us away from doing the stuff that nobody else will do, or is it driving us towards it and helping us to actually have those conversations? So hopefully that answers the question, but that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, is it helping us do the right things or is it hindering us? So I don't think that, like, we can all have the empathy, the compassion, the sympathy, we can have all of these feelings, but as a leader, is it helping us to do the right? Is the intention there helping us to do the right job, to do the painful things that no one else is willing to do.
Chris, I wonder if it comes back to what Jim said earlier around safety, because in that scenario you just gave, if I can't have a difficult conversation with somebody, I may not be feeling safe within the realm of that person. Because if
Totally.
I'm feeling safe within somebody else, I'm going to have those difficult conversations. Perhaps because I have a trust of their intention, my intention. But in my life, where I've shied away from a difficult conversation, it was because there was a fear of judgment, a fear of not being understood. I could name a whole bunch of fears. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, as a leader or as somebody who needs to have a difficult, like, so whose role is it to set the conditions for a conversation like that?
yeah.
So the very question needs to be answered collectively by leaders, by staff members, by employees, by middle managers is who sets the rules for the conversation. And we can't have artful and constructive dissent communication unless the parameters are set. And here the very thing, Chris, like imagining you're my leader, I would feel like, okay, Chris has a framework where constructive dissent, meaning we do it with a few parameters in place. I won't go into them today, but they're fairly thematic in that it's respectful, right? But so you course correct me, and I have to take the course correction narrative of my leader because that's the position I've been placed in. I'm standing in fear. The leader is also performing, as we just dialogued moments ago, out of fear to some degree. So all of our prefrontal cortexes have some limitations to really draw on the sense foraging, the feeling of what it feels like to be in this corrective environment where I'm getting a course correction. And do we have the privilege of constructive dissent? And what are those rules that says that I could say, oh gosh, boss, like thanks for pointing it out. Do you mind if I offer my thoughts on it without losing favor? So we haven't taught each other how to have these parameters, and therefore we can have a constructive disagreement, or that is a image of constructive dissent. You know what? I don't feel like I've been dropping the ball, and here's why. If it's okay for me to say. So I love that you say like who sets the rules. It almost needs to be every conversation, right? Because I may be an empath with a different energy, and I feel your words with a whole different weight. If you say drop the ball to me, maybe I have a chemical response that causes me to have a barrier to progress in the conversation. But if, as an empath, if you know that about me personally, you say, Jim, can I talk about you something that really I have some questions about, but I know we can move through it together, right? Because it's a way different version. So I think there's no communication loop that says, here's exactly how to have the conversations, critical conversations, crucial conversations, call them what you want. Every conversation is an exchange of chemistry and it has to be individualized. The nuanced, emotionally intelligent leader knows how to do that without work.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that sometimes a difficult conversation you need to have is why can't we have a difficult conversation? Right? It's like if you can't have, do you know what I mean? It's like we need to have that conversation first about how to set the conditions. We have this really cool, like we call it like I call it a snap, which is like a 90-second honest agreement that we have in a room like that. You have it with a client, or you can do it with a team member, and it's literally just this opening, we call it a vanguard, right? Get ahead of problems before they become problems, but disarm the room, like disarm. We don't want to come in and fight each other. We want to come in and actually have a conversation. So how can we create an agreement within that first 90 seconds that helps set the conditions nice and easy, right? Like, so you might include things like, hey, look, I'm here to understand. And so part of that is I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, and those questions might go a little bit deeper than what you're used to normally with your other line manager. But trust me, every question has a purpose, and I want to understand. But if at any point it feels uncomfortable, just let me know. You're not going to hurt my feelings. And at the same time, I'd love for you to be honest and transparent with me. I think it'll help us have the right conversation. Is that something that we can agree on today? It's a short version, but something just really short, 90 seconds, just sort of brings about the conditions that that conversation can take place. In other words, we're not coming to fight each other, coming into, have
It
that
enhances
conversation.
relational productivity because you set the boundaries. I love that. I'd love to
Mhm.
see the full narrative if when we connect after the
Sure,
podcast,
absolutely,
because
yeah.
it's so helpful to define it. And when you talk about, just a brief note, when this fear thing, and that part of Quinn's question is how it's reducing potential or productivity. And when I was in a newer role as a fire captain in the fire service, the dudes got on the truck to go out for some training and said, "Hey, Cap, if we go the wrong direction for a call, are you gonna like lose your mind and be yelling at me as the driver, like our previous captain?" And I said, "That's sad that you have to go through that. I'm sorry, but no. You do whatever you do. I'm here to support you no matter what. I've gone the wrong way. Everyone's gone the wrong way, but we've always gotten to the call and done the best work we can. If you, we used to bunk down at night. I said, if you miss the alarm tone because you've had a horrible journey in the few days before and you just kind of slept through it for some odd reason, we'll get you. Please don't stress. Reducing that stress and fear and uncertainty just led to higher productivity. None of my crew members ever missed an address.
Mm.
Is really a big bonus out of that reduction, because now fear, as you know, fear reduces even relational progress and success.
Jim, where does that psychological safety draw the line? Because when those two words come together and I speak them, in a keynote speech or to a leadership group, um, you're going to get the occasional eye roll, right? It's seen as
Yeah.
kumbaya, it's seen as woo woo. Um, where does that psychological safety draw the line from being supportive, allowing people to make mistakes, allowing them to be themselves, their authentic original selves, and hand holding and placating and letting people get away with things?
Yeah, supportive performance management means we understand people have different capacity to provide, to do the work that they're required to maintain their job. So I think that's where the line is drawn, Quinn, is when I no longer, because of the woohoo kumbaya sense of me, I'm no longer performing. But the fact is it's a dual role, because the leader, if they're a wise leader, they realize I don't have to feel what they're feeling to use cognitive empathy and be strategic in finding, because as we just learned recently here today in our chat, leaders' job is to draw people into their most productive selves if possible. So if I don't feel it, well, no, Quinn, get over it. That's my real feeling. But the strategic element of me as a leader, because right, there's many roles, is to, okay, I can nuance the relationship with Quinn and enhance his productivity, enhance my success and Quinn's success, and prevent a clash.
Jivi,
Mm.
what do you think about that? Because I know you and Jim and I all have spoken about psychological safety, and Chris, I'll come to you in a second. But where is that line drawn? Because my form of leadership has always been, here's what I expect. There's a firmness there. There's certainly structure to it, which people might say is command control. But the people that I was leading, and I'm speaking more actually on the sports field, so teams that I've coached, is that they knew it was never personal. It was never a personal attack. One, they felt that it was never a personal attack, and two, it was because we were trying to accomplish something together as a team. It's not because it was about me and wins and and accomplishments. It was more about I still want the team to grow. I want everyone to get better. What's your thought on psychological safety and that line that needs to be drawn?
I think what sits on the line is really a three-letter word, which is ego. I think in everything that we talk about is where is the ego sitting a moment in time? Is it sitting in the driver's seat, in the passenger seat, in the trunk, or is it not in the car at all? And I am similar to you, Quinn. I'm very assertive in my leadership. I don't suffer a fool in my business, but I'm very kind. I'm very compassionate. So I will literally, if I'm terminating somebody, say, hey, this is just an awkward conversation for me as it would be for you. And yet I feel that you're better suited for a different tribe. I can help you find that tribe. Like there's still a loving, compassionate, viewpoint to what you're saying. And hence why people don't pick up on, negative things, Quinn, in the scenario that you're explaining, because they understand that the ego is not in the driver's seat in those scenarios. And I think that in all of our conversations, even in the last 5 minutes that we've had, I was sitting here contemplating, even in the boundary setting, because I do a lot of family conflict, like a lot, as you know, Quinn, a lot of succession plan family conflict. And setting boundaries, setting those vanguards and setting the boundaries and all those kinds of things often get skyboshed by the ego. So I can go through an entire session, think everything went really well, and then all of a sudden, kaboom, it didn't go well. So I would say for that psychological safety, for me, it's where is the ego sitting in the vehicle?
Chris, I want to toss to you because your book, The Authoritative Coach, speaks to being an authority and having that presence. But what's your take on psychological safety and how it can work in the workplace without it looking too soft?
Yeah, I think we're talking about, there's a spectrum we're all talking about here. Is like there's a spectrum between being assertive and being arrogant. Those are two different things, right? Arrogance is through the lens of ego. Assertiveness is through the lens of competence, right? So it's like those are two different things. In other words, if you're ego driven, you're saying, hey, I'm right and you're wrong. I'm always right and you're always wrong. But if you're doing it through competence and confidence, and that's what you're expressing, it comes across as like you do know what you're talking about, but there's a willingness to be wrong. And there's also a willingness to learn, but it doesn't mean that I can still be 100% committed and convicted to my ideas. In other words, I can communicate very confidently without everybody feeling like I'm being arrogant. I think there's a lot of, there's a spectrum there, right? And you're right, where's the ego sitting? The ego's over on the arrogant side, the more confident, self-assured, high degree of self-respect, but a willingness to work with other people. And I think there's something happening there, right? I do think about this a lot, where you want your competencies and your confidence to come together closely, not the ego to be driving that. But at the same time, I think just what Jim and Jivi are saying as well, I think there's something about being able to create an environment where, like, you want to invite, like I was talking pre-show, we were talking about this new opportunity I'm developing, right? I want to invite people in to, like, I want to give them a bigger pair of shoes to come and fill, right? A bigger game to play. And so that means there's going to be higher standards, higher stakes, higher expectation, higher degree of expectation around competency. The pace is going to go up, the sense of urgency is going to go up, and the tolerance for excuses is going to go down, right? And it's like, how do you do all of that whilst also creating an environment where that can take place? And of course, the big thing is, can I and am I allowed to make a mistake? And what happens when I do? Right? So if you want people to play a bigger game, if you want to increase those expectations, people need to know what happens if they drive the wrong way in the fire engine or whatever, right? They need to know that there's some way for us to talk that out, and that I'm allowed to make mistakes. So I remember a time in my career, it's happened too many times, but I don't know if you guys will agree with me or not, or I've had a similar experience, but the biggest lessons I ever learned were my biggest mistakes. Like, the biggest mistakes I ever made are the things that stay with me. And there's a reason for that. It's a little bit, obviously, personality-wise, there's a resilience there. I want to learn from my mistakes. But ultimately, that's what it's all about. It isn't a mistake. It's not a failure. It's a lesson learned if we're willing to see it that way. So how do we, create that type of environment where all of those things can be true? And you can be assertive and you can have all those high expectations. And at the same time, we can play that bigger game. We can fill those bigger shoes. And it can come from a place of, like, wanting to achieve something great. It doesn't come from fear and ego, which is, again, we're shining. Where's the light? Where's the light being shone in this case? Fear, thinking about myself too much in all of this, So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of what I've been thinking about as I've been listening to what's been said there. So the question is, can we create these high expectations, but also create psychological safety? I don't know that the expectations can be set without the psychological safety. Can you expect people to achieve more without the ability to feel like they can take risks and try new things?
In
And therefore,
my doctorate, Chris, I was the most difficult question, and still I haven't been able to answer this question clearly. I got through my candidacy by answering it, but still it's not the question. Heart, the answer is, why would somebody give a shit? Like, we say all these things, yeah? I think they're beautiful. We throw around words like collaboration, transparency, authenticity, all these things, yeah? Even within businesses, I hear them. But ultimately, in my research, when I was like, why would somebody give a shit about what GV is saying? Like, why? Yeah. So as we're talking here, I'm still sitting with the same question. I'm like, yeah, I feel it in my bones. I love what you're saying, Chris. I love what you're saying, Jim. Quinn, we've worked together enough to know, to have experiences, and yet I still sit with the same freaking question. It's like, why would somebody who's making 20 mil, 30 mil, even 3 mil, why would they give a shit about everything that we're saying? Why does, a safe environment matter? Why does how we communicate matter? Why does coaching, everything that we're talking about, why does it matter to them? If I'm sitting here lining my pocket, why would I give a shit?
And I would say that, sorry, I'm just going to interject there, Jim. I would say that we've all worked, the clients that we work with, I've always suggested that the people out there that are those types of people, GV, excuse me, aren't the ones that are calling our companies to ask for leadership training generally. Because they're not going to change. There's really, apologies, there's really three types of leaders out there. They're the ones that are never going to change. You don't teach an old dog new tricks. They're not calling us to become their leadership coaches. There's the ones that truly believe in growth of themselves and their company through new ideas, new philosophies, more current ways of doing things. And then there's ones that, kind of are just completely lost and afraid to ask for help, right? So how do we get those bullheaded, stubborn, I want to say boomer because it tends to be the older generation that's like that? How do we get them to change their minds? Or is it something that you just can't do? It's like telling your teenager to clean their room. It's like they got to figure it out for themselves. They gotta almost hit a bit of a rock bottom, or they need to have an episode or a situation that really shakes them up. Is it possible to change people like that? Jim, what do you think?
I don't think, just to be really clear on the answer, I don't think it's possible at this point. And I think that's why, if we re-explore when we start developing leaders for these 20 million, 30 million, for even mid-level supervisory positions. And the fact is, like, when I, again, in early 90s, started a career, I saw some of my colleagues that were starting the same time with wide eyes, see the 5 bars on the chief, and they wanted to be that. Okay, they were in year 0, and this happens in all sizes and parameters, all sizes and designs of organizations. But people want to be the leader. But what happens there is we start developing neuronal energy and building a map for how we're going to lead based out of ego because of ambition. Passion and ambition collide and make for a negative outcome. So if we are truly concerned about the future of leadership, and then I think one of the methods is to train leaders in years 4, 5, 6 of their career journey. Begin leadership training there, because then people get to begin exploring, what kind of a leader will I be? In that phase, no one will ever say, I'm going to be like that leader who is an asshole. No one will say that. But eventually, if they don't get to develop their programming for the style of leadership, core value, ethical leadership, I would never be like that, and continue developing that, then we're going to end up with the same leadership cycle of leaders that can't meet the needs of the staff, and then land in that place, like Jivi says, why would they care? Well, eventually they don't, because it's a neural-informed communication where whatever our neurons have been programming as our map for the future, as little humans and young employees, becomes the reality for older humans and older employees.
Anyone else?
I was going to say a couple of points on that. It's great, Jim. Why should we care? That's thrown me off, that question from GV. What's been on my mind is this idea of, like, you get what you measure for, right? So, like, if you've got an organization and you're measuring profitability and revenue, you're going to get leaders doing the activities that generate the number going in the right direction around those metrics, right? One of the challenges we have in leadership is, how do you measure effective leadership, right? So if we could, try to address the question and I don't think there is an answer, maybe one answer anyway, but it's like certainly one of them seems to be something to do with measurement, right? We're measuring leaders in a way that has them perform in a specific way, right? Which is maybe not in the way that we would want our leaders to behave. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I think as well is like the tools are different. So you get promoted to leader, but you're never trained to be one. And so I think about the competency trap a lot, where I watch leaders, they come into a leadership role and they think that the tools that they had are the tools that they need, but the tools that they have are the tools they need to sell in order to get the tools they need to succeed as a leader. So the technical ability that they had in the seat that they're in before is not the communication tools that they need to succeed as a leader in the seat that they're in, right? So it's like they need to unlearn a bunch of stuff and then relearn a bunch of stuff. And I don't know that anybody tells anybody that. They just say, you're really good with people. Like, here's a job that you could do, right? And now you're measured, like, and then all of a sudden you're like, and it's not, I don't think the question is like people, like your example, Jim, which is like, I look at this leader and I want the office, I want the stripes, I want the whatever. But nobody says, like, the question is, do you want to do what a leader does?
Right.
Not, do you want to be a leader? It's like, are you prepared and willing, insert capable of doing what a leader does? Oh, so the question now is, well, what does a leader do exactly? Probably a list of stuff that you don't want to do, truthfully. And if we had a little bit more awareness about that, maybe we would get closer to, oh, these are the things that I should be doing. How do we measure success in those particular areas? Let's build our leadership around that, perhaps. But the truth is like, there's loads of people that give a shit. There's loads of people that care. There's leaders that look at their middle management and they can see that they're struggling. They're like, I need this middle management tier to succeed if I'm to succeed. So they can see clearly that their success leads to the success of the company as a whole, and they can see them struggling. And then they get the coaches in, they get the training in, and they can do it. There are people that care because they can see that their people need it. Right? They can see that moving from one role to another doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a great communicator or a great leader. But I think the question is, how do you help more people see that, right? I don't have an answer for that. All I know is that we sell lots of different coaching programs, and Leadership One is the most difficult one to sell. We sell sales coaching, and that is like hotcakes.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we've got
tangible,
sales
right?
teams sales teams will spend money on coaching and training until whenever, right? But leadership coaching, to try and sell that to leaders, there's something difficult about that, helping leaders to see that they need help. I don't have any answer for that. I just know the data from our business side is we're not selling the same thing. Yeah.
Chris, the neurochemistry of leadership, when a person ascends to a certain height, economically, status, vocationally, the production of different neurochemistry than I have at this level starts to limit the capacity for empathy. And wealth limits the capacity for empathy. Top level leadership, the power, and particularly in males, drives not just testosterone, but other adrenal hormones. And empathy is subdued, right? We dilute that. So to Jivi's point and to how you're answering that, there is always a why to this. Why don't leaders care more? And some do, it's very honestly true. But there's less of a capacity for that because the chemistry takes over and changes their empathy is one of the simplest understandings. And this is why I posit that if we can just encourage people to start developing their leadership style in years 3, 4, and 5, there's a heightened propensity that their neurology is going to stay in that direction when they ascend to leadership, if they do. But those might not be the people that care to ascend to leadership ultimately as well.
Yeah. I wonder if, like, the other issue as well is that the stakes aren't clearly high enough for something like that. Like, there's not enough at stake. Like, you could run an organization and be a pretty crappy leader and still succeed. You can still have a few books written about you or whatever. You could still succeed.
Yeah.
Like, there's what's at stake if I don't? What are the consequences if I don't? And maybe the consequences aren't obvious enough or great enough. I don't know. Just a thought, really.
And sales is you're bringing in the money, right? It's
Yeah.
still Talking about.
almost a direct
Yeah.
relationship between the training and the actual effectiveness of the training. So the feedback loop's tight.
Exactly. And leadership, like when I talk to leaders about leadership, it's intangible. I can't touch it. I can't feel it. I don't know what you mean by that. Like I'm profitable. So what's your issue, Jivi? Well, people don't like you. Well, I don't really give a care if they don't like me, as long as they get a paycheck. Like literally, the mindset is intangible versus tangible. Sales training is tangible. I'm making money. I can show it versus revenue and profit margins and all the triple bottom lines and all the beautiful things that they do. But yet, when it comes to leadership, it's something like, let's just look at Trump. Like seriously, let's just look at Trump's leadership. Like when you think of it, yes, there's some good components to it, but when you look at examples such as that in the world, regardless of who it is, that is what we're measuring against when it comes to leadership. You can measure up against Steve Jobs. Highly successful, but does that mean they showed empathy? Absolutely not. Right. So, and I often think about Steve Jobs' leadership, and I think about, that after he passed away is when people started saying what his leadership was actually like. But they didn't say it while he was alive because they needed their jobs, because they were paid well, whatever the reasons were. Yeah. So I think that a lot of this also comes to tangible versus intangible, money versus, again, the commitment to self-awareness.
I think the thing that came to mind through this past several minutes and this discussion is the thing that stuck out for me was the "why should I care" statement. And that not only from the leader, but obviously from the people that they are leading. And it's funny, it always throws me back to that scene from Office Space, where they bring in those two consultants and they're interviewing the guy, and he goes, "I just do enough to not get fired. I really don't. Why would I give a shit? Why would I work extra hours so they can, pad their bonus checks at the end of the year, and I don't see a dime?" And it's hilarious, but it's a real social commentary on how most people go about their daily jobs. It's, I'm doing just enough to not get fired. And when we go back to the conversation around what good leadership looks like, it really influences people to want to do more, to give a shit, to care about what they do. And I've always professed, and I should trademark this, is that people want to like who they work for, who they work with, and what they do.
Mm.
And if they have two of the three, they're probably not going anywhere. They're probably going to, make an honest effort day in and day out. I would add the psychological safety, but that comes from who you work for and who you work with, right? To create a productive company. But we all recognize that there were companies like Apple with Steve Jobs and other groups in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that you could use command control. I've heard lots of horrible stories about Steve Jobs and the way he led, but they were productive for whatever reason. But is it sustainable? And I think, going back to, and I know I've had conversations, I believe, with Jim and Jivi about this, maybe Chris not so much, about this generation, Gen Z, my apologies, Gen Z, they said enough. Sorry, we're not going to put up with this crap anymore. And they are kind of becoming the ad hoc leaders in the workplace, and they're the ones that are kind of taking over, and they're using their feet to make a stand and saying, "Listen, we'll just go somewhere else." And it's really throwing Boomer and Gen X owners and leaders for a loop. So this leads to my question: can leadership not come from above, but come from below? Come from the staff, come from the employees, maybe someone who's not even in a leadership position, to create success in a company?
We worked with people, Quinn, on that we identified with them that our role as the non-leaders is to do what it takes to make our leaders look good, because that's going to bode well for success for all of us. And the reality was that we were becoming that generation that is changing the system, right? Because you can't change people, but we can change the system, and it's people that will change the system. So the way you speak about this theme that's occurring with the current generation in the employment world is that they're changing the system.
Yeah.
Right. And so for you and me and Jivi and Chris, like that is a threat to what we understand the system, and maybe not technically for each of us, but for generally that this demographic, my demographic, it's a threat to my vocational identity, which is my social identity, which is my individual identity, because as Jivi knows better than most of us, I believe here, is most of us in this generation weren't taught to understand our identity so we can connect our core values, operationalize our core values to our work, and then develop that sense of care, give a shit in Jivi's words, that says, okay, yeah, my core values are what's guiding me, not the externals, because most of the things we mentioned here are the externals that motivate people to care. When we can't, that's not sustainable, and people want to care, they just lost their way in how to care. But so understanding that at interaction A or B or call X or Y, what core values of mine or my staff members were deployed to make that work, whatever the situation was. It's operationalizing core values. When we see where our core values fit into the work we did and do, we then can connect to the human element of self and others in a more healthy way.
Mhm. Jim, I think when it comes to identity, I think it was the opposite, that we were actually trained to unidentify. Don't bring your problems to work. It's like it's not a freaking microchip that I take out of my head and leave outside the front office door. Like
Right.
you walk in as a whole person. And when I wrote Permission to Be You, that was the whole intention behind that book, is how do we give ourselves permission to show up as selves? Because we've been taught, leave your problems at home. That's not, work is work and home is home and all those kinds of things. Yeah. And then I think when it comes to, Quinn, what you said about Zen Z, I think my son and my daughter really summed this up for me a couple of weeks ago, and it hit me like a bullet, honestly. They said, we are trying to fix what you did wrong. And I looked at her and I said, what the hell do you mean what I did wrong? Like, I thought I did pretty good. And she goes, no. And so they were giving examples of my parents who 14, 15-hour days, 30 years in the same job because loyalty was the most important thing in the job. And then what do? So I fixed the 30 years, 3 to 5 years in a job, still working 14, 15-hour days until the point at which, I collapsed and had all these health issues and yada, yada, yada. And now the generations to come are saying self-care is really important. Our leave times are really important. If we're going to take a stress leave for 6 weeks, we're going to take a stress leave for 6 weeks. And when I take a stress leave, I feel guilty about it. Even though I had to take it because, a whole bunch of crap was going on. But the point was, even during the 6 weeks that I was off, I felt guilty about being off. So, when my kids said to me, they said, we're just fixing what you did wrong. We're not doing something that's right or wrong. We're just fixing what you guys didn't do well.
Sad.
The behaviors that leaders need to unlearn going into 2026 and the next several years. I could ask that question. What are the behaviors leaders must unlearn? But we've already, I think, agreed that there are leaders out there who just refuse to unlearn their behaviors, and maybe for the reason that it's just hard. It's an old adage. It's hard to change, an old dog and teach them new tricks. They don't know anything different, and that's definitely boomer generation. I think they are, for the most part, unchangeable, and they are retiring and moving out of the workplace. Gen X is still very much in the workplace. They're the majority of the leaders and founders of businesses now today. There are some millennial leaders, and I think they've done some changing too. But if we did ask that question, and let's keep it short, what is a behavior or a couple of behaviors that leaders just can't exhibit today in the workplace? It just can't happen because it's going to lead to turnover. It's going to lead to unproductivity, and just basically spelling doom for that company or that organization. Jim, let's start with you.
unpredictability and uncertainty, like the uncertainty tax on our human condition is so profound. It takes so much energy for us to be productive in all the other relational, vocational, social, professional ways that we all deserve. So, so be predictable and remove that uncertainty tax, and things will start to shift. And this is part of Jivi's talking about the younger generation. Hey, we're fixing what you caused. There's so much uncertainty for this culture now, particularly that generation. They just want the uncertainty to pause for a little bit so they can be at peace for a little bit and their nervous system can discharge for a little bit.
Chris?
Stop making it about you. I think that's basically my summary for today is instead of making it all about you, make it about them. Let that be your intention.
Yeah, Jivi.
Unlearn the fact that you don't have to commit to your own self-identity. So there has to be a learning of who am I? If we don't answer the question of who am I, how are you going to lead other people? Because there's a ship in leadership. And if you don't understand the ship portion of it, and that comes from learning about self.
I heard someone, well, actually, it was a post on LinkedIn this year, and they simplified leadership down to, it was less than a sentence even, and it was brilliant. They said leadership is about influence. That's it. Now, positive or negative, because it can be negative as well. But what is the influence you have on others? And I go back to when I was coaching youth sports, especially football teams. And it seemed like every year, the captains of the football team were always the most popular players. Not necessarily the best leaders, but they were the best players on the field and they were the most popular. And when we would sit in the coaching room and we would talk about the players on the team, you would often hear this statement. It's like, yeah, the other players really rally around Scott. They really rally around Chris, whether they were a captain or not. And that to me speaks to influence, is that you don't have to be in a leadership position to influence others. And I didn't realize what the term was for that, but there's just this vibe, this aura when you're around those people that other people elevate a little bit and they're influenced by that person. And it doesn't have to be rah. It can be, whatever in terms of their persona. But how would you respond to that? Leadership is influence. Chris?
Are people happy when you're walking in the room or walking out? That's what I think about. Do you light up the room or do you make it darker? Do people succeed more when you're around or more when you're not around? Are you helpful and useful to people, or are you the opposite? I don't know if that's what we're really talking about, but I think does my vision, I know we're talking about core values, which I don't know if enough people really know what that is or what theirs are unless we press them to articulate them. And I think some people struggle with it because they don't have the vocabulary even. Like when we're asking people to say how they feel, they'll say angry, and they don't know about all their sub-feelings. But one thing I kind of feel like people do have a sense of is their own ambition about what they might want. Like, in other words, as a leader, can I be okay that you don't want to work with me forever? Is that okay? Is it okay that you might only want to work with me for 18 months, 2 years and move on? Is that okay? Can we I think there's some letting go of this stuff, in other words, when we hire people, can we figure out what success looks like for them whilst they're here? And am I okay that their vision for success sits within mine for the whole company? Or is it not okay that they want to come here, learn something, and leave? Like I say this to my team, it's like, you're not going to be here forever, but I'm telling you right now, I've failed you if you don't leave here better than when you came in. And if you want to go and run your own marketing company, then let's make sure you get everything you need in order to do that here. Because if I can teach you how to do that here, you might stay, but you're running an excellent marketing department in my company while you're here anyway, right? So it's like, I think there's just a lot of ego and fear that's holding a lot of leaders back from actually getting the most out of people for the period of time that they are. Thinking that they're going to work for you forever, not going to happen,
Mm.
I think you really just pulled apart in a positive way, Chris. What I said about leadership is influence. I think you
Yeah.
really just kind of gave it more of a definition and pulled it apart and explained the different parts of it. Jivi, leadership is influence. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to say something first that
Mhm.
now here in this group, this is a really beautiful example of psychological safety. I think if anybody is going to see an example, this is an example. Like I've not had to hold back. I've not had to hold back on my truckers' mouths, sometimes. Like I've not had to think about what I'm going to say to you guys.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that to me is such a beautiful example of psychological safety. Now, influence, I would say that where leadership is influence from the perspective of if I am moving humanity forward, in every micro and macro conversation I have with people, because communication is the very tapestry of our existence. That I feel that every time I talk to somebody, there's an opportunity to shift. I shift, the person in front of me shifts, the collective in front of me shifts. Yeah. So I think that that influence for me goes directly into how are we moving humanity forward in a positive, loving, accelerated, evolutionary way so that I leave the world a better place in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm. Jim, let's add to that and add your flavor to the leadership is influence statement.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe and Chris. Really insightful. I actually lost the question because I was just enjoying learning from you both at the time. So, leadership, I think the leadership as influence becomes clear for me when I realize a consistently bad leader unifies the team. But is that the kind of influence I want, right? So, and you've seen this, Quinn. I've seen this in the teamwork versions we've been involved in our life. Because when there's a bad leader, the influence is still happening. The team now has a shared experience and a common adversary, but it unifies them. But is that valuable enough for you as a leader? Not you, Quinn. I'm talking to any leader who might be listening. Is that valuable enough for you as a leader, or can you also flip it and unify a team by being a consistent, coherent, predictable leader that doesn't charge an uncertainty tax? That also unifies a team.
Hmm. Yeah, there's another spectrum that's coming to mind here for me, which is this idea that as a leader, are you creating dependency within the team or independence in the team, right?
Mhm.
Are you creating compliance or commitment? Those are two different things as well.
Good.
I think the big question still sits here for me is like, anybody that's listening to this as well should probably ask themselves this question: is what does a leader do? And
Mhm.
being able to list out what it is a leader does and the behaviors that are associated with success in that doing role, I think is we've talked around a lot of them today. But this idea of dependency versus independence or compliance versus commitment, these are another, some other filters, perhaps other, I don't know, perspectives or lenses to look at it through.
Chris, might
And
I
is that
ask?
leader,
Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
Gene, is that leader setting up the environment to develop a psychological health and safety system? It's a safety system that is the only way we're going to accomplish the purposeful goal of having a healthy, safe, and healthy work environment.
Mm. I was going to add, Chris, to your question, what does a leader do? I would add a complementary question for myself about how do I want the other person to feel? Because, one of the questions I ask leaders is, what conversations do you think your team is having around their dining room table when they go home about you? And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, your legacy starts at their dining room table. It doesn't start in your work environment, right? Like when you go home, what are you saying about your work environment, who you work for, who you work for, all those kinds of things." So the dining room table for me really sets that legacy. So your question, I think, yeah, for me is very complementary to the question of how do you want people to feel when they're around you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think about this a lot. We have this model where there's like four communication styles of a leader. Like you imagine a leader, imagine someone comes into your office with a problem that you've solved 100 times and the answer's on the tip of your tongue. How do you respond in the moment? Do you respond like an instructor? Here's exactly what you need to do step by step. Do you respond like a dictator, which is like, here's what I need you to do?
Mhm.
Do you respond like a lawyer? So you manipulate them to do what you want them to do, but they think they're doing it for themselves? Or do you respond more like a pathfinder, which is where our system sits, which is this idea that I'm going to ask you, what do you think you should, based on everything you know, what would be your first move here? And you're empowering and creating independence within the other, but you're also helping them to grow and to get better and to maybe next time they'll solve the problem on their own without coming to you. And so we're teaching, I like this idea that everybody's watching you as a leader, right? And not that the spotlight's on you, but they're picking up everything. Like a parent, your kids pick up how you communicate, how you're feeling, like how you're turning up, all the rest of it. And so I think a lot of the teachings, a lot of the lessons that we can express to our team come through exactly how we turn up, right?
Mhm.
We show it. We don't necessarily need to tell people how to be a leader. We can actually show them how to do it. And I think we'll probably all agree that the stakes are high in leadership,
Mhm.
but I don't know that I'm not entirely convinced that every leader believes that.
Mhm.
Carol Batchelder, she pulled a Popeyes dinner of truth when she took over. Like it was a horrifically untrusted franchise, and they were at zero with trust. And she didn't call a meeting. Hey, we got to fix things. She went to dinner and she invited several staff, maybe 10-year, whatever range. And it was interesting because the idea was to connect over dinner. Like you said, what are the questions or conversations over dinner? And basically the question was, what is one thing we're doing unintentionally that makes your job harder? And then just left it
Mm,
for the honest dinner conversation. Like if leaders would say, I'm holding some dinners of truth. Like I know this is kind of idealistic, but it just draws out true conversation when people get to bring that to a dinner table with their leader.
yeah, what's great about it as well, though, is it's just one question. We're not trying to solve everything right now. One question at
Mhm.
each dinner. That's progress, right? It might take like years perhaps to break through some of this, but one question at a time. Let's work through it together. I love that.
I think that's where the current pushback comes from. And we talked about it earlier, how you can sell sales training to companies because they see a tangible result from it. Selling leadership training, it's like, we're selling them air, right? We're selling them philosophies and ideas, and this is going to take forever. We need quick wins. Um, and you said it best, Chris. And one of the best sayings that I love, and I use it all the time, is shoot the alligator closest to the boat.
Mm.
And I love that saying because it basically says pick one thing, change that behavior. And I want to make a side comment on this. Leadership transcends ellipses, meaning when your child walks into your home, if you're the parent, when your student walks into your classroom, you're the teacher. When an athlete walks onto the practice field, you're the coach, and employees, right? Leadership transcends just business and employment. It's everywhere, right? But what is one thing, and I'm going to ask each of you this question, so I'll get your responses, that the more stubborn, let's say boomer owner, leader, founder, or Gen X, someone who's kind of set in their ways, old dog, can't learn the new tricks, and a lot of it is a little bit of fear. They don't want to lose authority. They feel like it's a lot of work that may never turn out. There will be no results from it. It'll just be wasted time. So, what's the closest alligator to the boat that they could shoot? One thing that they could do now that doesn't reduce their authority, that still maintains who they are and their identity, but shows just a glimmer of vulnerability to their staff or the people they're leading that says, huh, he's changing, she's changing. And it leads to other little changes and it builds. And it doesn't have to be a, $50,000 leadership training for their team. It could be one thing that leader does right now. What's the closest alligator to the boat, Chris?
Click here to buy, right? No, I'm joking. So for me, it's like you've got to step towards something, I think. So it's fine to shoot the alligator, but like it seems like it's at a distance. So I would say every leader is avoiding something. Like, so what is it that you're avoiding that you know you need to deal with? The longer you put it off, the harder it gets.
Mm.
I would say that is a place, something to move towards. I don't know what that is. It could be anything, but you're avoiding it and you know you shouldn't be. And your call to action is to go deal with it now.
Okay. Jivi, what's your alligator?
I would say share a story of a mistake or a vulnerability with your team. Share a picture of something personal that you're doing. I think humanizing leadership is where it starts, and you cannot expect people to do something that you are not willing to do. So if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you're not willing to share a mistake, you can't expect other people to do it. So I would say the closest alligator is take a story, take a narrative in which in the past you've made a mistake, and find a way to share that narrative with your team.
Without it looking performative, I'm assuming, right?
Exactly.
Or
Yeah,
virtue
yeah.
virtue signaling, right? Okay, excellent. Love that, Jim.
I think it's pay it backwards. It's about, for me, it would be that leader can go look at the 7-year-old data on engagement surveys and pick something from that that wasn't addressed and brought forward and say, you know what, I'm reassessing. Wished we would have talked about this more. I'm going to try and implement this. It's got to be a good idea, but draw something from that historical layering of psychological illness that's now in that cellular organization that and do it now. And because that's going to say, oh my gosh, we're way back there. That gives hope that the leader is changing.
Excellent. Love those answers. As we start to wind up, I want to throw this question to each of you. If you were placed in a leadership position, it doesn't matter the organization, but you're new to that team, you're new to that group. What does your first 100 days look like as the leader of a new group or organization who you've never met before, but you've been tasked to lead this group? Jivi, let's start with you.
80% listening, 20% questions. So nothing telling, getting to know stakeholders, getting to know your team, getting to know what the gap is between the vision of the company and what the actuality is that's actually happening with boots on the ground. But I would say for me, the most important part is say nothing, tell nothing, advise nothing until I know, I have more context. So I would say 80% listening, 20% questions, and then getting to know the different tiers of people and what their superpowers are.
Chris.
Yeah, it's pretty much what I would say. I think the only thing that I might emphasize more is just one-on-one time with
Mm.
with the right people. Just getting to know, like, if there's 100 people in the organization, who are the real, like, the 20 that I need to know deeply,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like, who do I need to spend time with? I would probably say that, and I would just underline all of that with just like a high degree of curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So that's where I would probably go in. I think if I was going to add one more thing, I would probably be looking for something like that has an 80-20 feel. Like, can I get a sense of what the biggest bottleneck is in this company that's really slowing us down? I'd be probably looking for something like that as well, kind of like off to the sides. But for the most part, it's going to come through exactly what GV just said.
Jim.
Yeah, sorry, I get ideal in these ones. And what a great question. It's unfair because I got to go last here. But, as an ideal situation, I would tell staff collectively, we're decreasing profit for 18 months. We're increasing wages for everybody for 18 months. And we're going to set the corporate core values on the shelf so that I can personally understand and our leaders can understand your individual core values. And that's based on the research that says staff doesn't care that I know the company core values. Staff cares if I know that my leaders know my core values. And that develops loyalty and engagement. So but speaking to a lot of people one-on-one, as Chris and Jivi said too.
So I think what we've learned today is I don't want to say simple, but it can be simple. And I think people complicate leadership. I think people obviously, we all come from different backgrounds. We come from different parts of the world. We come from different childhoods and subtle traumas we experienced that form who we are. So it's hard to simplify leadership, but I think people probably got a much better picture of how they can be a better leader from this conversation today. Authority is earned through clarity, really not control. Psychological safety isn't comfort. It's really truth without fear. And conscious, heartfelt leadership isn't soft. It's really the hardest work a leader will ever do. So to the three of you, Chris, Jim, and Jivi, I want to give you this opportunity to speak about what you and your coaching, your consultation brings to the table for organizations, for groups that you work with. So a chance to promote, a chance to talk about who you are, the company that you lead, and what you bring to the table for leaders and organizations around the world. Jivi, I'll start with you.
You bet. So my work is around quantum business growth. So what we do is we do a quantum business assessment in which we've taken Bhutan's national happiness factors and converted them into organizational assessments. Yeah. So the foundation is still based on happiness factors from Bhutan. From that assessment, then we draw up a blueprint of what that alignment could look like. We use a lot of terminology like frequency, coherence, all of the transcendence, as Quinn said earlier, a lot of those kinds of terminology in the work that we do, but we do leadership development, team development, and executive coaching is the work that we do.
Excellent. Thank you, Jivi. Jim, let's talk about what you and your wife, Angela, are doing with SAS Mental Health.
And we develop and design psychoeducation and mental health education and human improvement workshops that provide people with the permission to, first of all, move through the why. Why am I? Why are we? Why is the collective behaving in a certain way? Because when we can move through the why, we can actually formulate the how. How do we shift? How do we adjust? How do we nudge to improve as humans? And developing those individual strategies for leaders, for their organizations, often, if not always, helps that progress feel like, hey, I improved as a human because it starts there, and now we're improving as an organization. And that it also involves optimizing people's wellness by recognizing where their deficits are and what is drawing on their resources and energy to provide deficits, so we can start to shift away from those things and have a more healthy journey of exertion and effort. Because as you know better than anyone, Quinn, sometimes effort takes a lot of effort.
Absolutely. Chris, let's finish with you. Let's talk about Question First.
Yeah, so I'm one of the founders of QuestionFirstGroup, which is a organizational communication system. So what we do, we don't do just one department of training. We want to coach and train whole organizations to have this whole vocabulary so they can all communicate in the same way, which we feel is really, really important. So sales teams, leadership teams, and client-facing teams as well. We want to help people to become what we call pathfinders, which is this idea that for a lot of leaders, especially, they're going into uncharted territory, right? And we want to give them the tools as a pathfinder to really navigate that path, if you will. And so we want them to be able to do that really well. And what that means is just, being able to communicate at a high degree, world-class communication within these organizations. So we talked a lot about fear, imposter syndrome. We want to give people the skills, the tools, the competencies to confidently have high stakes conversations with their team. So it's a very practical set of tools that we give people through role play. We found out that like less than 5% of leaders have had any formal communication training. So a lot of these leaders were promoted to lead but never trained to communicate. And that's the problem that we're trying to fix.
Excellent. To Chris, Jim, and Jivi, thank you very much for being here today, for elevating this conversation around leadership and other topics. To everyone listening, pick one insight that you took from the show today, apply it this week, shoot the alligator closest to the boat, watch what changes. This is the Effort Over Results podcast. I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson. Lead well, take care of your people, and I'll see you on the next episode.